One of the worst things that can happen to you, though, at First Liberty is to know you got to follow Kelly Shackelford and fill in for him, because Kelly's such an amazing speaker. He's a president and CEO of our amazing firm, and he is, I think, one of the best leaders I've ever worked with and under. Fearless, humble, and inspiring man. So please pray for him. He has a kidney infection, so he's a little miserable right now. So please keep him in your prayers. But I want to start by telling you about who I am. I am Keisha Russell, and I was saved on a high school trip in my junior year of high school. Prior to then, I did not go to church. Nobody in my family was a Christian. And I decided at that moment to dedicate my life to purpose and to serving, and I've been doing that ever since. And that's one of the reasons why I work for First Liberty Institute, is because their purpose and mission is kingdom-oriented, and they are doing amazing things for our country, and you are going to hear about all of that right now. So let's talk about First Liberty. For those of you who have never heard of the organization, can I get a show of hands of those of you who are not familiar with First Liberty? Fresh meat. Yes. First Liberty is awesome. We are the largest legal organization where all we do is religious liberty. We represent our clients for free, and because we know a lot of the people who end up being persecuted for their religious freedom can't always pay for very expensive litigation. So a lot of the cases I'm going to talk to you about at the Supreme Court, a lot of those cases would have cost millions and millions of dollars, and many of those clients would not have been able to see the issue through if they had to pay for it. So that's one of the reasons why we do what we do. And why is the First Amendment important? Why is religious liberty important? Well, we believe that religious liberty is the fundamental freedom. It is the cornerstone freedom. If the government can tell you who to worship and how to worship, then they can tell you everything else, and they will. They'll tell you whether you can speak or not. They'll tell you who to associate with, and all of your other freedoms collapse when the government takes hold of your ability to control your own conscience and your religious freedom. And so that's why we think religious freedom is the most important freedom to concentrate on. And as an example, I'll tell you that during COVID, and some of the persecution that was going on with religious organizations at the time, every time First Liberty was able to vindicate that church or that religious organization or get a win for them, it also resulted in businesses in that same area being opened, right? And so once you open the door and you move past those walls, you knock down the walls for every other freedom for the businesses and everything like that. And so that's an example, I think, of how important religious freedom is. But we've seen over the last couple of years how just defeated some religious people have become because of the state of our country, how antagonistic many people in the population have become towards religious freedom, towards Christians, towards Jewish people, just towards any sort of idea that might be traditional or values oriented. But there's still people out there like you all who are not willing to take this lying down, who are willing to fight, who are willing to stand up for their freedoms. And they come from all walks of life, and many of them are our clients. And so the first person I'm going to introduce you to is a Virginia mother, and she went to speak to the school board about the things that she was concerned about. And she doesn't work for them or anything. She just wanted to talk about her feelings on what was going on in her kids' district. And we know there are a lot of issues in public school districts right now, right? About 90% of students go to school in public schools. And so we need to be very concerned about some of the things going on in those schools. And so she went up to talk, and at the end of her speech, she wanted to pray for the school board, for the district, for the students, for the teachers, and she was told she could not do that, even though she's exercising her free speech, her First Amendment right. But turns out there was a remnant behind her, a group of people who are not willing to take that lying down. Let's take a look. Hopefully I pressed the right button here. This is the clicker, right? There we go. No, that's not it. Green. I'm pressing green. Big green. Here we go.
We have to work together to do this. So I would like to ask, if you guys don't mind, I'd like to pray for Suffolk Public Schools with all of you. If you'd like to take a moment, bow your heads, please. Anybody objects? I apologize.
We can't do that.
Why can't we? I'd like to pray for our students in our school.
That's not in what you signed up to do, ma'am.
Well, it's in regards to all of this. It's a transparency, accountability. I'm praying that we do that.
Ma'am, no, ma'am. We ask that you get back onto your topic. No one.
That is my topic, sir.
Well, then it's not permitted at this time.
To pray for our schools is not permitted.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So now, each of you hear this. If anybody would like to pray with me after the meeting outside, I'd invite you, because I think that that's the only way that we're going to come together is through God and our faith.
I believe that man should always pray. I mean, I love prayer, but this is not the place per the law. And we're going to ask Attorney Waller if you could speak to it.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
At this time, we're going to go to recess.
Ask the officers to remove her.
Officers, during recess, can you clear the room?
Maybe if they were protesting in favor of Hamas, they might have been asked to stay. But this is how hostile people are right now towards religious practice, that prayer is a threat, and prayer is criminalized, and prayer is censored. But we at First Liberty know that no matter where you are and who you are, that the First Amendment still protects you, and you are still allowed to have control of your own conscience. I wanted to introduce you to Pastor Chris Avell, who runs a church called Dad's Place in Ohio. Dad's Place keeps their doors open during the winter so that anybody who doesn't have a place to go can go into the church and stay warm. He was threatened, and a lot of governments right now are doing what we call criminalizing compassion. That is not allowing churches to serve, to minister, to evangelize, and essentially confining church into what we do every day on Sunday or Saturday in worship, and that's it. And you'll hear there are politicians right now that try to limit the First Amendment, the free exercise clause, to only being useful in a church and not outside of it. And so we were able to help Pastor Chris Avell and get the government office back. All he was doing was allowing people to come into his church when it was cold and at night if they didn't have anywhere to go. Or how about Rabbi Herzl, right? So you saw, and you've all seen all of the anti-Semitism going on in our country right now, all of the things happening against Israel, and all of the young students who don't quite understand what they're standing up for right now. But I worked for First Liberty for about 6 or 7 years, and then I went to clerk for a federal judge last year in the Fifth Circuit, Judge Jim Ho, who's an amazing judge and is doing amazing things for our country and in the judiciary. We are very, very blessed to have him as a federal judge right now. But before I went to clerk, and my first day back at First Liberty was Monday. So I had to tell you how quickly First Liberty gets you back in the water, right? But even coming back, I realized how just prevalent this problem is. I litigated a couple of cases on behalf of synagogues and Jewish clients, and I can tell you that the anti-Semitism was brazen, particularly in local government. And you might say, well, what do you mean by brazen? Yeah, that's what I mean by brazen. I have other cases where people in government made comments like this, made comments directly against Jewish worshipers, saying that they couldn't do things. Now, for this particular case, okay, is about, I think this is Boca Raton where we were. So you're allowed to build anything in this area. You can build whatever you want, a bar, a strip club, a church even. The one thing you can't build is a synagogue. And this is how they explain why you can't build a synagogue there. So we're talking some pretty blatant, brazen anti-Semitism, anti-religious bigotry happening in our country right now. We obviously won for him, but the battles just keep coming. So meet Coach Freeze. He's a coach at a university, and that university had a devotion and a worship night, and during that night, one of his players asked him to baptize him. He wanted to become a Christian, and so Coach Freeze baptized him, and he was threatened with being terminated, and the university said they were going to take away his livelihood, and we were able to save him as well. You see, these are just everyday Americans, right? These aren't people or big businesses necessarily that have the resources to fight, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of local governments will attack these kinds of people, why a university or the HOAs and things like that, they will attack because they don't think these people have the resources to defend themselves. And sometimes these people do know they're wrong. They just don't care. And they're going to do it because they don't think that anyone's going to stop them. Now, one of my favorite things to do is to defend students. And this is one of our latest cases. This is a 5th grader who was barred from starting a prayer club, even though that same school allows you to have all kinds of clubs, including a pride club, right? But she couldn't have a prayer club, and she decided she wasn't going to take it lying down either. She was going to stand up for herself. Her parents called us, asked us to help. She got on Fox News. We had to pressure this school into letting her start this prayer club, even though the law allows this. The law requires the school to treat her with neutrality, and they told her no. And so we had to go in and bring in the big guns and say, either you let her start this prayer club or we're going to sue you, and we will win. And so we did win, and she has started the prayer club, and from what I understand, she's got 25 students a week praying with her so far. So this is a case that some people are more familiar with. We defended a number of service members, big class action case, service members who were kicked out of the military for not getting the COVID vaccine. Not just any service members, Navy SEALs, okay? Some of the most elite, most healthy people on the planet, and they were being threatened. Their pensions were being threatened. They were being threatened with dishonorable discharge. It was a mess. And so we started a big class action, and there were a lot of cases just like this being litigated in the United States at that time, and we were the only ones to win this kind of case. And it turns out that after we won, 80,000 service members were impacted by our win in that case. And so we just got that win a couple of weeks ago. But it kind of just shows you the sort of blatant discrimination. I mean, these are the people who fight for our freedoms every day, and they're not even getting any respect from the government that they're actually fighting for. So that case was disheartening, and still, for me, it remains to be that. I mean, the Department of Defense really treated these service members awfully. And like I told you earlier, when we get a win in one area, it often results in wins in another area, or even all across the country. So, for example, that one student I just showed you, Laura, when other students see her, they're going to be inspired. And that's one of the reasons why students or schools will censor students, is because that they know other students are watching, right? They know that if they censor this student, then everyone else is going to see what happened, and they're likely not going to want to start the prayer group or whatever it is. But then when you put her on TV and other students across the country see her standing up for herself, and she's just like them, she's 11 years old, she's 10 years old. I had clients who were 14, 15 years old. Other students see that, and they get inspired and they say, well, if she can do it, I can do it too. And that's why it's really important for people to stand up for their faith, and that's why it's important that First Liberty does what it does. So some of our most amazing wins have come at the United States Supreme Court. Now, I don't know if you know this, but the Supreme Court doesn't take very many cases. They probably get about 8,000 requests, and I think last year they took 57 cases. So your odds of even getting a review are just this big. So First Liberty has won 4 Supreme cases in the last 2 years. So not only did they take our cases, we won those cases. So that to me is just a huge blessing. The Lord is definitely protecting us, covering us. This case, Carson versus Macon, I actually helped sign these clients in my first year at First Liberty. I started in 2017, pretty much right after I graduated. I think we signed the clients in 2018. So we've been litigating this case for quite a number of years. This was about a main voucher program that allowed parents to take vouchers and use for their students going to private schools, but they were prohibited from using those vouchers at religious schools. So it was an explicit provision in the main regulations that religious schools were banned. Well, that's a pretty easy case as far as we're concerned, because you're not allowed to do that. You cannot discriminate against religion in that way. And so we did win that case, and we've been able to use our win in that case to help other schools in other states. And so that was a huge win, and we're really excited about that. And so when you think about school choice, these are the kinds of things that the government will do to reduce the impact of religious schools and reduce the impact of religion overall. I'll say this before I move on. One of the most important things, I think, to the sort of liberal left, and what you'll say are some people who are just, for lack of a better term, anti-American, their goal is to take the children, right? They know that they're not going to get most of us. We're set in our ways, but the children are still up for grabs as far as they're concerned. And so what we're in right now is a battle for the next generation. And so we've got to pay close attention to what people are doing in the schools. And that's why I think what we're doing at First Liberty is so powerful, because not only do we represent the lone student, the 5th grader, but we also represent families and even universities and private religious schools all over the country. The next case I want to tell you about is Gerald Groff. Okay, so Gerald Groff was a postal worker who wanted to take Sundays off. There's a case, I won't go into it too much, but essentially that case allowed employers to deny religious accommodations for pretty much any reason. It was very difficult to get an accommodation under this case, which we thought was a violation of the Constitution, obviously. And so we were able to help him, and Gerald Groff, every time I think about this case, it really inspires me. So we went to the Supreme Court, and we said, look, you know this decision is wrong, and you need to overturn it. And so that's what they did. We won that case 9-0. So that means even the liberal justices agreed that that case had to go. But that case will impact everyone who works and everyone who will work. That is a big, big deal. All right, so I'm going to move on here to my last point, and this is about court packing, essentially. So does everybody understand what court packing is? Okay, so we know that court packing is a horrible thing, right? So that just means that what the Democrats will do is add seats to the Supreme Court so that they can fill those seats with a bunch of judges that they think will do exactly what they want to be done. And so we have initiated a campaign to defend the courts, because the Constitution means nothing if there is no enforcement, right? So if you look at China, for example, China promises its citizens freedom of religion and freedom of speech, but they don't get it. Why? Because no one defends it. And so that is one of the reasons why we're doing what we do at First Liberty. So I'm going to show you just a couple of headlines here to show you that this is a very, very big deal. This is one of the reasons why you'll see a lot of the liberals are attacking the conservative justices in the Supreme Court right now. Biden's speech during Trump's assassination attempt, and when he was explaining his resignation, during both of those speeches, he said that packing the court and court reform were the main issues for the Democratic Party. And so our campaign right now is to defend the courts, because we know we can't do what we do unless there is a court. Okay, I'm going to hit some of these. I won't explain all of them. President Harris or potential President Harris, Vice President Harris, has said that she is absolutely open to court reform. And so that is one of our main issues right now. The Democrats have about a $30 million deal right now to get that issue off the ground. Right now, First Liberty is running a $2 million campaign for Supreme Court reform. Now, I unfortunately can't stay for the whole summit, although I would love to, but my co-worker, Mike Cahill, can you stand up, please? There's just more headlines here. But I want to introduce my co-worker, Mike Cahill. And because I have to leave sometime this afternoon, I want you guys to talk to him about how you can get involved in what we do at First Liberty, how you can help us defend religious freedom, how you can help us defend the courts. And we have a very comprehensive list of all judges and justices before they are chosen, and we share that with senators and everything so that they know to vote in a way that's going to defend the Constitution. So see Mike to help us, and I want to thank you so much for letting me come and sub for Kelly. I appreciate it. What we're about to do is a quick Q&A. So yeah, you want to come sit over here?
Thank you, Keisha.
Sure.
I just want to remind everyone, you have these cards on your table. I love how the Steamboat Institute does Q&A. Your questions will come to this iPad that has magically been placed here for my use, and I will ask Keisha some of your questions, but I'm going to take moderator's privilege and ask the first question. Sometimes, Keisha, I even run into other people of faith, and they'll say something like, well, my faith is important to me, but, you know, separation of church and state. And they'll say, because we have separation of church and state, it's a phrase that I have heard a lot lately. That means that, you know, I guess to them, it means that our faith is only supposed to take place within the closed doors of our synagogue or our church or our mosque. So how would you define separation of church and state and its relevance to what you're doing at the First Liberty Institute?
Well, the separation of church and state really just means that the government needs to stay out of the church's business, frankly. It means that the government can't tell the church what to do. It doesn't mean that the church shouldn't get involved in politics or shouldn't get involved in what's going on in the country. That is absurd. And frankly, you know, particularly if you're a Christian, right? I don't know of too many biblical characters who did not have to engage with the government in some way, right? Esther, she was fighting a proclamation from the government, right? We've got all of these people who had to defend their faith, and they had to do it against the government. They had to do it against the proclamation. They had to do it against the tyrannical king, right? So that is the essence of being a Christian. You're always going to be fighting against the world, and that is the reason why Christians need to understand that if we're not involved, then the world gets to define what our country is. And if we don't define it, they will. And so we've got to take back that control.
I agree. And honestly, recently I've been reminded that it can be much harder as a Christian or a person of faith to engage civilly in a fight, in a disagreement, than it is to just kind of shirk away from it. You know, meekness doesn't mean quietness. It means doing things with courage and conviction in the right way. So I appreciate what you're doing. I do have some great audience questions I want to get to before we take a break at 10 o'clock. First question, how do we, the public, get journalists to do their job, investigate and report honestly on matters of religious liberty?
Call them out and stop watching them. So if, you know, they make their money off of views, right? So stop watching them. And it works. We know it works. Because we've seen what's happened with CNN's lineup, I mean, they're still not the best, but at the same time, they realize, I mean, the viewership dropped considerably after, I think, 2020 and 2021. And so that's the way they make money. And so if you stop watching them and you stop engaging with them, that's at least one way. The other way is engage with people who are telling the truth. Devote your resources, your funding, your attention to those people who are speaking the truth. And the other thing is, the media is really not here to educate you. And so you cannot rely on the media to tell you what to do. You have to take control over your own mind and what you choose to believe. And to do that, you have to go out and find the truth yourself sometimes. So you can't rely on the media all the time to give you news. They're just sometimes not really there to give you that. They're there to give you the opinions they want you to have, right? And so taking control over that, I think, is the best way.
Okay, great. The questions just multiplied, so I appreciate everyone who's submitting questions. I do have a question about the video that you showed. Someone asked, can you legally pray in any school meeting? Does that apply to any faith?
Can you legally pray in any school meeting? Well, this is a more nuanced question. In this situation, this woman is speaking on her own behalf. She's speaking on her personal behalf. So that's the difference. If you're speaking as an employee of the government, right, or as an employee of whoever, even your private employer, they can, in some ways, if you're engaging with their clients or with students, they have some control over what you say. But as soon as you're in your own personal capacity, yes, you can. Now, can a student just get up during the middle of a lecture and pray? No, because that would be disruptive. But anywhere that freedom of speech is allowed, yes, prayer is also allowed. So if you're allowed to talk about sports with somebody, then somebody else can pray.
Okay, this next question's a big one.
All right.
It's a big one.
I'm ready.
Does winning legal battles matter if we don't win the culture war? Is law upstream from culture/religion, or vice versa?
Well.
Books have been written. Volumes of books have been written on this question, but
Right.
we want to hear what Keisha thinks.
That's a serious question. Well, look, if we don't have the law, if we don't have the courts, then we don't have an opportunity to win. And so we need the law. We need to win these legal battles because at the end of the day, those are the things that are keeping Christians employed, out of prison in some cases. I mean, it has to happen, right? You have to win. You have to have a court that's going to protect the Constitution. So it's necessary. The culture war is also necessary. Why? Because those kids that they're indoctrinating right now, those are going to be your voters here pretty soon, right? And we already see the remnants of some of this going on in some of these younger Congress people and their rhetoric, and you're wondering, where did this come from? Well, it came from the schools that they went to, right? They've been taught these things. And so if we don't take that very, very seriously, then we're probably going to lose the ability to win legal battles in the future. So I think they both play off each other, but I guess as a lawyer, I would have to say that the legal trumps the culture war, at least a little bit.
Well, we can all play different roles in that.
Yes,
First Liberty is
absolutely.
doing its part in the courts, absolutely. And one questioner submitted a question. The Oklahoma Supreme Court has turned down their first religious public charter school. Are there any states where they champion religious freedom in education?
The Oklahoma charter school situation was hard to watch.
Can you give us a little background on that if we haven't followed?
No, I mean, I wasn't at First Liberty when this was happening. I was at my clerkship, so I can't speak to the nuances of this. I know that there were people at my firm who were working on this issue, but I'll just say it's an ongoing battle, and I don't think it's at its end just yet. So that's all I can say for now.
Can states have religious charter schools, religious public charter schools?
That's an open question.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an open question right
Okay.
now. But some would say no. Of course, we would say yes. But it's a battle that just hasn't, the outcome just hasn't happened just yet. So.
An audience member asked, how does First Liberty litigate differently from other nonprofits?
Well, that's a good question. We are very mindful about the resources that our donors give us. And so we maximize that donor dollar as much as possible. So that means we often bring in some of these high-powered lawyers from these huge law firms to help us on our cases so that our lawyers can do a lot of different things. So I may manage a big case like Carson, and we might bring in a big law firm to help us, and they're doing it pro bono. And if our clients were paying, they would be paying millions and millions of dollars for these big lawyers to help. And so that's the way we kind of maximize the dollar. So instead of having 3 or 4 First Liberty lawyers on a case, we've got 1, and then we've got this entire team that we've put together, the best in the business, the best in the circuit, some of these people who've already argued in front of the Supreme Court. It's one of the best things about First Liberty is that being a lawyer there, you got to be kind of humble because you're going to give up the opportunity. Kelly does it all the time. The leadership does it all the time. They give up the ability to argue in front of the Supreme Court. Can Kelly do it? Absolutely. But he doesn't because he wants a guy like Paul Clement or an Allison Ho. These are these big corporate lawyers to go and do it because they've already done it. And not only that, that's the trade-off. That's what they get for helping us for free. They get to argue an appellate court case or a Supreme Court case. And so that's a very unique model. I don't know of any other organization that does that, and that allows us to take the donor dollar very far.
Great. How should we deal with situations where, this is another question about education, how should we deal with situations in schools where, for example, there may be something posted in a classroom that essentially is a creed, that has metaphysical beliefs captured in, for example, you guys have all seen the signs. In this house, we believe women's rights are human rights, love is love, science is real. I mean, to me, that is a creed. However, it's not a religious creed because the people who support it say, well, these are just my secular humanist values. So how do you handle a situation where something like that might be allowed in public schools, but then a different creed, say the Apostles' Creed or the Ten Commandments, or those things are frowned upon and said, oh, that's religion, so don't bring that in here?
Well, schools and the government in general, they're supposed to handle those issues neutrally. So if a teacher is allowed to post what they believe about any of these things, women's rights or whatever, then the teacher in the next classroom should be allowed to post what she thinks about religion. Is that how it always goes? No. But that's a harder question just because there are some nuances of law about government speech that I mentioned up there. But generally speaking, the way you push back is by being a really vocal parent, forming these coalitions with parents. School boards don't like angry parents. They don't like loud parents. They don't like people on the news talking about them. Politicians don't like bad press. And so if you want something to change, you give them bad press. And that's one of the reasons why the organizations like Moms for Liberty, why the left hates them, because they will not shut up or go away. And that's what you have to do as a parent. You just have to keep fighting because the other side is going to fight. They're always going to be in it. And so you have to really fight for your children. You have to fight for the curriculum. You have to be very involved in what's going on and form these big, coalitions and these big groups to help you fight, because that's the only way that we're going to make headway in public education.
This next question moves from the schoolhouse to the church building, and a questioner asks, has First Liberty defended churches when their 501c3 status has been threatened? And I'll kind of add to this question, can you outline for us a little bit about what the 501c3 status of churches allows them to do or not do when it comes to politics?
So there's a law called the Johnson Amendment that says 501c3s, churches particularly, they cannot endorse political candidates, okay? So they can't take a position on one candidate or the other. That includes First Liberty as a 501c3, includes churches, but a lot of people believe that the Johnson Amendment is unconstitutional. And so the IRS doesn't typically enforce that amendment because they don't want anyone challenging it and then destroying it, essentially, right? So yes, we have, but as soon as you push back against the IRS, they tend to back down because they don't want to go into litigation because that administration doesn't want to be the one that lost the Johnson Amendment. And they will. I think they would. I mean, if they're litigating against us, they will. That much I know for sure. But yeah, if anyone has that problem, please call us. We're happy to defend you on that issue because we think it is a winning issue. And like I said, they tend to back away because they don't want to lose the Johnson Amendment.
One questioner asks about packing the court. So going back to this topic that you covered towards the end of your presentation, I find that topic both fascinating and terrifying. So the question is, what moves do the Democrats need to make to actually pull off packing the court? Do they need to control all three branches of government or only two branches, or sort of explain the logistics of how packing the court might happen?
So the way they would pack the court is that it only takes a majority vote in the House and the Senate to change the number of judges or justices in a particular court. So for example, the Supreme Court has 9 justices. With a majority vote, the Congress could increase that number to 15 or whatever, and then add a bunch of Democrats onto the Supreme Court, right? So all they need is a majority vote to do that. It's been brought up in history before, and most people on both sides of the aisle have said that this is a really bad idea because it's very obvious that it will destroy the court. I mean, it's just, people do know this. But if you are grasping for power, then you don't care. And you're going to do whatever you need to do in order to advance the ideology and the issues that you want. So that's essentially what it would take, just a majority vote. And so if they get control over both houses, they will do it. And it's a very terrifying thing that I think a lot of Americans are not paying a lot of attention to right now, because there's so many other things going on that we need to pay attention to. And so First Liberty is really watching this issue closely, and we're looking for all kinds of allies on this issue, and Mike can help you get involved and sign up to get like our newsletters and things like that, and you'll find out how you can be involved in that issue.
We just have a few minutes left, maybe time for 1 or 2 more questions, but I wanted to follow up on what you're saying about packing the court. This is an issue where I think some maybe center-left Americans might say, well, I just don't like the outcomes at the Supreme Court because they may disagree with some of the decisions. And so that might make them think, well, I'm okay with packing the court because I'll get better outcomes for the kind of left-leaning policies that I support. What would you say to people in that crowd about how damaging packing the court would be, not just to sort of norms that we've held on to for a long time as the country, but ultimately to the best policy outcomes for everyone?
So if the Democrats add a bunch of justices to the Supreme Court and they have control of both houses, what are the Republicans going to do when they're back in control? The exact same thing, right? And so there's no court once that happens, right? So no matter what side of the aisle you're on, packing the court is not going to help you. I mean, this is really just about getting control of the Supreme Court, right? Which is why you see these ethics complaints against Clarence Thomas and Alito. That's the term limits. Who would the term limits impact? Clarence Thomas, Justice Alito, and Roberts, right? So if you go for that, then you get what you want if you're a liberal. But the tables always turn, right? The liberals really, had to eat it because they got rid of the filibuster on the Supreme Court justice nominees, right? So they couldn't do anything when we were able to get Amy Coney Barrett and all these people on the Supreme Court after the filibuster was gone, and they're the ones who did it, right? And then now they have to, deal with what they've done. And packing the courts would be the same thing, except it would really ruin the courts for everyone because you're never going to know what you're going to get from the Supreme Court. In Venezuela right now, after the courts have been packed, the only win you can get is the one that the government wants you to have, right? The court is an arm of the government. They're a political entity. And so regardless of what side you're on, packing the courts is not going to help. It's just going to destroy the country. And many people in history have confirmed that.
Thank you, Keisha. Let's give Keisha a hand.